$4,200. That is the average out-of-pocket cost to fix an EGR cooler failure on a 6.0 PowerStroke. A failure Ford's own internal engineering team had already documented before a single truck left the factory. Ford knew. They shipped it anyway, for 4 years. Between 2003 and 2007, Ford sold approximately 1.1 million Super Duty trucks, equipped with the 6.0-liter PowerStroke diesel. That engine, designed by International Navistar under a partnership agreement signed in 1997, became the single most complained about diesel engine in American truck history. The NHTSA received more than 7,500 formal complaints. Class action litigation was filed in federal court. Independent diesel shops across the country built entire business models around fixing what Ford refused to acknowledge. This is not a story about a bad engine. It is a story about a calculated decision. The 6.0 PowerStroke used a variable geometry turbocharger sourced from Garrett. The vanes inside that turbocharger were designed to rotate and modulate boost pressure based on engine demand. In practice, carbon buildup from the EGR system would jam those vanes solid at highway speeds. When that happened, the turbo would deliver uncontrolled boost. Engines hydro-locked. Head gaskets failed under pressure spikes the block was never designed to survive. Ford's engineers called this out internally. The fix, a revised vane geometry and updated EGR valve, existed before the 2004 model year launch. They launched the 2004 model anyway. Nothing changed. The EGR system on the 6.0 was the root of nearly every catastrophic failure mode the engine ever produced. Exhaust gas recirculation recirculates hot combustion gases back through the intake to reduce NOx emissions. Ford and Navistar designed an EGR cooler, essentially a heat exchanger, to cool those gases before they re-entered the intake. The cooler used thin coolant passages that were prone to cracking under the thermal cycling of a diesel work engine. When the cooler cracked, coolant mixed with combustion gases. The coolant contaminated the EGR valve. The EGR valve stuck open. Oil temperatures spiked. Head gaskets failed. 1 cooler, 4 failure modes. $1,100 at an independent shop if caught early. $4,000 plus at a dealer by the time the head gaskets were gone. Ford was aware of the coolant passage failure by late 2003. Technical Service Bulletin 03-21-18 was issued that year, acknowledging EGR cooler degradation and recommending coolant system flushes at shortened intervals. A TSB is not a recall. It does not trigger a consumer notification. It does not obligate Ford to pay for the repair. It sits in a database that only technicians and dedicated owners think to check. The truck owner driving to work at 6 in the morning had no idea it existed. They did not fix the truck. They documented the problem and sold you the truck. In 2004, Ford introduced the variable geometry turbo actuator update as a running production change, meaning trucks built after a certain VN received the revised component, and trucks built before did not. No retrofit program was announced. No owner notification was sent. If your truck was on the early side of that production cutoff, you owned a turbocharger that could destroy itself without warning at highway speed. The only way to know if your truck had the updated actuator was to pull the turbocharger and inspect it, or to find a technician who knew to look. That production cutoff detail was never communicated to buyers. The head gasket failure pattern on the 6.0 was not random. It was predictable. The 6.0 block used 4 head bolts per cylinder, down from the 6-bolt design used on the 7.3 PowerStroke that preceded it. The 7.3 was over-engineered. It was built to survive abuse. Fleet operators documented original 7.3 blocks clearing 400,000 miles without machine work. The 6.0 was designed to tighter tolerances with fewer fasteners, and the thermal stress created by EGR cooler failures pushed those tolerances past their limit. When the head gaskets went, the repair required head removal, resurfacing, new multi-layer steel head gaskets, and ARP head studs, because the factory bolts would not provide adequate clamping force on a reassembled deck. Total repair cost at a dealer, $6,000 to $9,000. At an independent shop with the right tooling, $3,500 to $5,000 if you were lucky. Ford sold this truck as a work vehicle for people who depended on it to earn a living. International Navistar, who designed and supplied the 6.0 under their VT365 designation, was not entirely blameless. The engine had been rushed to market to meet Ford's timeline and emissions targets simultaneously. Navistar had flagged thermal management concerns with the EGR cooler design during development. Those concerns were overruled by program schedule pressure. Ford needed a diesel that met 2004 EPA emissions standards. Navistar delivered one. The fact that the cooler design was marginal was a known variable that both parties accepted in order to hit a launch date. That launch date was worth more to Ford than your engine was. The financial picture explains everything. In fiscal year 2004, Ford's F-Series was the best-selling vehicle in America for the 23rd consecutive year. The Super Duty diesel commanded a $7,000 to $10,000 price premium over the base gas powertrain. A recall or a voluntary repair program on 1.1 million trucks, even a partial one, would have cost Ford an estimated $1.5 to $2 billion based on per-unit repair cost projections in the class action filings. The out-of-court settlement Ford reached in 2007, covering a subset of 2003 through 2007 model year owners, was structured to cost Ford far less than a formal recall would have. The litigation was cheaper than the fix, so they chose the litigation. What makes this different from ordinary corporate negligence is the timeline. The 7.3 PowerStroke, the engine the 6.0 replaced, had spent nearly a decade proving itself in fleet service. School districts ran 7.3 powered buses past 300,000 miles. Construction companies logged original drivetrain hours that competitors used in their own marketing. Ford knew what a reliable diesel truck meant to the people who bought them. They built one for almost a decade. Then they replaced it with an engine they knew was compromised, because meeting an emissions deadline and protecting margin was more important than protecting the customer who had already proven they would be loyal. They did not build a better truck. They built a compliant one and called it better. If you already own a 6.0 and you intend to keep it, the repair path is documented and the knowledge is widely available. The critical upgrades are a bulletproof diesel EGR cooler. Their part number is BP-EGRC60P, combined with an oil cooler flush and replacement if your coolant has ever shown any contamination. ARP head studs, part number 250-4202, are mandatory on any engine that has been apart. Have the EGR valve inspected and cleaned at every oil change interval. A stock 6.0 that has been properly addressed will run reliably. The problem is that Ford never told you it needed addressing. If you are buying one, the 2006 and 2007 model years received the most running production corrections. Avoid any truck that has not had documented coolant system work. Ask specifically whether the oil cooler has been replaced. Not flushed, replaced. A clogged oil cooler is the primary driver of head gasket failure, and a simple coolant flush does not address an oil cooler that is already partially blocked. Expect to pay $8,000 to $14,000 for a properly sorted example in private sale. Avoid dealer-certified pre-owned on these. The inspection checklist does not include the internal cooling system work that actually matters. The right to repair fight happening right now in state legislatures across the country is directly connected to what Ford did with the 6.0. When manufacturers can restrict access to diagnostic data, when TSBs are buried in subscription databases that independent shops cannot afford, when production changes are made mid-run without owner notification, the truck owner is not a customer. They are a revenue unit. The Massachusetts Right to Repair law, passed in 2020, was the first meaningful legislative response to this. It forced manufacturers to make OBD diagnostic data available to independent shops. It is being challenged in federal court. The 6.0 PowerStroke is the clearest case study in American truck history of what happens when an automaker decides that schedule, margin, and compliance matter more than the person who is going to spend $40,000 on a vehicle they are trusting with their livelihood. The evidence was in the TSBs. The motive was in the earnings reports. The damage was in the repair bills that working Americans paid out of pocket because Ford settled a class action instead of standing behind what they built. There is a video coming that covers the 6.4 PowerStroke, the engine Ford built to replace the 6.0 they had already broken. The 6.4 introduced a new failure mode that Ford had also documented internally before launch. That story follows the same pattern. Same motive, different engine, same outcome for the owner. If this is information you want to have before you buy your next truck, not after, subscribe. This channel exists because the industry counts on you not knowing what we just covered. Ford knew the 6.0 was broken. They sold it to you anyway. And the only thing standing between you and the next version of this story is whether you know it happened.